Hello sports fans, this is DM Gashbad. Who would like to hear some more about Blood Bowl? Judging from the viewership of my last video about this, almost no one, but that doesn't matter. This is a game that I want to play, and the local game shop, Junction Games in Rocklin, is starting another league. The last league that I started kind of fell apart and died and then sank into a swamp, but we're going to try this again. Here you can see a picture of the team that I'll be using. Again, I'll be using my beloved Orcs and Goblins. This is the Gutbeer Badgashes. Things to note, I have a troll in the middle, that's Pabst. I have my two Black Orcs flanking him. I have two throwers in the back, a little bit unusual, but I did max out the maximum 4 Blitzers, and they're all on the field as well. Rounding things out, I have a total of 3 Orc Linemen. One of them is in the reserves right now, not pictured, but you can see them out on the wings. I also got myself 2 rerolls. Now, the league is set up so that each team actually starts with 2 free rerolls, and they also start with 5 free fan factors. I'm not sure if I love this idea. I think it might be there to help more expensive teams, which I honestly don't think really need the help. It's kind of like when you're playing tournament and instead of having a tournament be 2,000 points for say Warhammer Fantasy, but they instead do 2,500. I feel like this is always a way to kind of prop up armies that are really expensive, and players feel like they have to make a choice between being, say, really good at numbers and really good at attack or something like that. And so you give them these bonuses, and that means they can do everything really well, whereas the team with the army with the garbage troops that can already fill out a bunch of junky things and you can't really spend those points very effectively, well, it doesn't help them as much. So I think this actually kind of works against teams like, say, halflings or goblins that would otherwise, just fill up their roster with a bunch of rerolls. Anyway, the bonus rerolls and fan factor don't really help them, and they can't really spend that money on extra guys very efficiently. But that's my personal thinking on it. Anyway, I digress. My first opponent is going to be the guy that's actually running the league this time. He's going to be running a Dwarf team. We'll see that in a second. He won the coin toss and elected to receive the ball. Here's a picture of his team after everything's been lined up. I think it's fairly straightforward. He's got 2 Slayers, he's got 2 Runners, he's got 2 Blitzers. Yeah, pretty standard Dwarf stuff. Anyway, you can see I've placed the ball kind of in between his 2 runners in the back. We get the changing weather result on the kickoff table. That means the ball scatters again because it's just more nice weather. We've got the nice underground stadium and the Dwarf home field. So, go figure, it's nice weather underground. The ball bounces 1 more square right in front of that Dwarf runner. So it's the Dwarf team's go, and that runner picks up the ball and moves forward, and the other runner moves up to support him. A Dwarf lineman far on the other side goes and pushes my Orc Lineman Corona line. His Blitzer knocks down my Blitzer, Smash Adams. His Dwarf lineman, again, just keeps pushing my front line around, and he pushes my Blitzer Nuke Castle. Ooh, and here's bad news. His Troll Slayer goes and knocks out my Black Orc Saw Miller. So he goes back to the knockout bin, and I'm down a Black Orc on the first turn of the game. His Troll Slayers, again, keep taking a toll on my front line. He goes up and he knocks down Pabst the Troll. A Dwarf lineman goes and knocks down Ham's Fist, my other Black Orc. Another Dwarf lineman goes and pushes my lineman Krieg Stone off to the sidelines. A Dwarf Blitzer goes and pushes back my Blitzer, St. Molly. And finally, the other Dwarf lineman pushes back my Blitzer, number 9, Sting Tao. So with all of his Dwarfs having successfully gone, it's my turn. So first thing, Smash Adams, my Orc Blitzer, stands up. My Black Orc Ham's Fist stands up. My thrower comes in from the backfield. Toss Ekis moves up to that far sideline to help out that side. My other thrower moves up to the center of the line in order to wake up Pabst the Troll. Pabst does manage to pass his stupidity and gets back up. Now it's time to start punching people. My lineman Corona Line knocks down the Dwarf on the far sideline. I have to burn a reroll in order to do this, but my number 9 Sting Tao gets to knock down a Dwarf lineman. My Blitzer, St. Molly, knocks down a Dwarf Blitzer. My other Blitzer, Nuke Castle, knocks down the Dwarf in front of him, but doesn't follow up. And that's the end of my first turn. So it's back to the Dwarf turn. His Dwarf lineman on the far side stands up. The Dwarf Blitzer gets a double knockdown result against my Blitzer Nuke Castle, so there's no effect there. So then his dwarf runner with the ball goes and takes a big chance. He moves straight up to my lineman number 4 Corona line. He has a plan, but I think he's taking a risk here. His other dwarf runner runs in, blitzes Corona line, and pushes him back to the sideline, keeping his ball handler safe. The Troll Slayer goes and moves up to make a nice line protecting that ball handler. His dwarf lineman stands up. His dwarf blitzer stands up. His dwarf blitzer goes into my blitzer Nuke Castle, but he has to burn a reroll in order to knock him down. His lineman again pushes my lineman, Krieg Stone, out there on the end. That's number 7. He does not follow up. And his Troll Slayer manages to push my thrower Natty Light, number 1. Alright, it's my turn again. Number 16, Nuke Castle, stands up again. Number 7, Krieg Stone, moves back to pin that dwarf lineman in place. My remaining Black Orc, Ham's Fist, goes and pushes that dwarf lineman. Pabst, unfortunately, fails his stupidity roll, and he's going to stand there drooling this round. My Blitzer, number 2, Smash Adams, gets a double knockdown result against the dwarf lineman, and of course, since all these dwarves have the block skill, there is no effect. However, my thrower, Toss Ekis, knocks down the Troll Slayer and doesn't follow up. Number 14, Blitzer, St. Molly, knocks down a dwarf lineman and again doesn't follow up. Number 9, my Blitzer, Sting Tao, goes and blitzes the Troll Slayer, knocks him down, and moves on through to help that middle. My thrower, Toss Ekis, moves over to that far sideline to block the dwarf advance. And finally, number 4, Corona Line, just pushes the dwarf lineman in front of him. It is dwarf turn 3, and that dwarf lineman just moves right back in. The Troll Slayer stands up. The dwarf lineman stands and moves up a little bit. His dwarf lineman pushes around my Blitzer Sting Tao. The Troll Slayer goes and blitzes Smash Adams, number 2, but he only manages to push him twice. His dwarf Blitzer knocks down my Blitzer, number 14, St. Molly. Now he's trying to make a move with the ball. The dwarf lineman pushes my thrower, Toss Ekis. The dwarf blitzer pushes my other thrower, Natty Light, number 1. And he has to spend yet another reroll in order to get that push against Krieg Stone all the way on the other side of the board. The dwarf lineman again goes and does some more pushing against my Black Orc, Ham's Fist. And finally, that runner with the ball goes and moves into contact with another one of my orcs. Alright, Orc turn, number 14, St. Molly stands up again. Number 2, my Blitzer, Smash Adams, stuns the Troll Slayer in front of him, which is great news. Pabst the Troll finally gets his head on straight and knocks down the Troll Slayer in front of him. And then we have a lot of action happening on that far side. My Blitzer, Sting Tao, goes and pushes a Dwarf Blitzer. And then my other Blitzer, Nuke Castle, number 16, goes and blitzes the runner with the ball. He gets a both down result. Now his runner does not have the block skill, so he goes down, the ball pops out behind him. Nuke Castle sees no reason not to go in and grab that. He moves in, takes the ball inside of a tackle zone, and dodges out. So that guy is a hero this round. My Black Orc, Ham's Fist, goes and knocks down the dwarf lineman in front of him. And then finally my thrower, Toss Ekis, goes and downs himself and a dwarf runner with a double knockdown result. It is the dwarf turn now, and he has lost the ball, so he needs to go and get it back. So the dwarf lineman stands up. The dwarf runner goes and blitzes my lineman, number 4, Corona Line, and pushes him into the crowd. He is okay, but he goes and moves out into the reserves box. The dwarf runner, for his part, goes and moves out to try and run down that ball. The dwarf lineman moves over to my ball carrier, Nuke Castle. His dwarf runner moves up to help. The Troll Slayer is in the middle, either turn over after being stunned or stand up. Here's another dwarf lineman moving over to help. The dwarf blitzer goes and knocks down my thrower, number 1, Natty Light. And his dwarf blitzer goes and runs into the face of number 14, St. Molly, and downs himself. That'll be a turnover, and it's Orc turn. Number 1, Natty Light, stands up again. Nuke Castle nimbly dodges away from the dwarf surrounding him and heads downfield. Number 2, Smash Adams, goes and marks that dwarf runner to try and give an easier job to my blitzer running down the field with the ball. Pabst goes again and knocks down the Troll Slayer in front of him. My Black Orc, Ham's Fist, goes and pushes the dwarf lineman. My Blitzer St. Molly goes around to the back of the Dwarf front line to try and keep everyone where they're at. Number 9 Sting Tao goes and blitzes, pushes the Dwarf Blitzer, doesn't follow up, and just moves on through that crowd. Toss Ekis doesn't like the position that he's at, so he stands up and tries to dodge out of the sideline. He fails. I failed the armor roll, and he stuns himself. So that's an Orc turnover. It's back to the Dwarfs. Troll Slayer stands up. The other Troll Slayer stands up. The Dwarf Blitzer knocks down my thrower, Natty Light. The throwers are not having an easy time of it today. His Dwarf Runner goes to help the beleaguered Dwarf line in the middle. The other Dwarf Runner dodges out to mark my Blitzer carrying the ball. His Dwarf Blitzer goes and stuns my Blitzer, Sting Tao. His Dwarf Lineman throws a blitz, goes into number 16 Nuke Castle. He knocks him down and the ball pops away. Further down the field, his lineman knocks down my lineman, Krieg Stone. And his Dwarf Blitzer comes in to discourage Krieg from standing up again. A Dwarf Lineman goes and knocks down my Blitzer St. Molly, does not follow up. And finally, his last lineman goes and knocks himself down, throwing a block against the Black Orc Ham's Fist. Number 14, my Blitzer St. Molly stands up and moves to help out with the ball. And not wanting to risk anything else before I make this play, my Blitzer Nuke Castle, number 16, gets up, dodges out of the tackle zones of the surrounding Dwarfs, picks up the ball, gets 2 go-for-its, and scores the first touchdown of the game, 1-0 Orcs. And here's my lineup for the kickoff. You can see that my Black Orc Saw Miller is back in the game after having a little nap in the KO dugout. You can also see that I have messed up my deployment a little bit. That thrower on the left is on the wrong side of that side field. He should be in the middle. I just didn't notice it, and that's a mess up. I'm sorry about that. Here is the receiving lineup for the Dwarfs. Here's where the ball ends up after, again, getting a changing weather result. It's still nice underground. His first Dwarf Runner moves up to try and keep my Orcs away from that ball. His Dwarf Lineman immediately throws a block against my lineman, Corona Line, but he has to spend a reroll in order to do it, and he just manages to get a push. He does not follow up. His lineman pushes my Blitzer, Sting Tao. His Troll Slayer throws a block into my Black Orc Saw Miller. That's number 6 there. He pushes him away, but he has to keep throwing blocks because he is frenzied, and on the second one he ends up knocking himself down. So it is back to the Orcs for their first turn in this drive. Number 4 Corona Line stands back up and moves back in to mark that Dwarf. Number 14 St. Molly pushes the Dwarf Blitzer in front of him. Number 9, Sting Tao stuns the Dwarf Lineman. Number 2, Smash Adams, my Orc Blitzer, knocks down the Dwarf Blitzer on the other side of the line of scrimmage. Number 16, the hero of the game so far, my Blitzer, Nuke Castle, goes and knocks down the other Dwarf, does not follow up. And here we see I'm spending my last reroll of the game to have my Black Orc Ham's Fist go and push the Troll Slayer. My lineman, Krieg Stone, moves towards the ball. Pabs pushes the Dwarf Lineman in front of him. My thrower, number 1, Natty Light, goes to mark those dwarves that have been knocked down on the far side. Black Orc Saw Miller pushes the Dwarf Lineman in front of him. And thrower Toss Ekis goes to move in front of the knockdown Troll Slayer to make sure he doesn't do anything crazy. Dwarf turn, Dwarf Lineman stands up. Another Dwarf Lineman stands up. Troll Slayer stands up. Dwarf Runner finally figures out what he's supposed to do and goes and gets the ball, moves to the middle of the field. His other Dwarf Runner goes in behind to try and protect him from my rampaging lineman. Another Dwarf Lineman stands up, and he has to spend his last reroll in order to make this block, but his Dwarf Lineman just causes double knockdowns to my Blitzer Nuke Castle, so there is no effect. And with no rerolls left, his Troll Slayer goes and stuns himself against my Black Orc Ham's Fist. Orc turn, my Blitzer number 9 Sting Tao knocks down the Dwarf Lineman in front of him. Black Orc Saw Miller knocks down the Dwarf Lineman in front of him. Blitzer Nuke Castle knocks down yet another Dwarf Lineman, and the Dwarves are falling, but they are all still alright. Black Orc Ham's Fist goes and blitzes the ball carrier and knocks him down. The ball is loose in the middle of the field. With all of my Orcs having moved up, I need to send my lineman Krieg Stone to whisper some instructions into Pabs the Troll. And I gotta tell you, this one totally confused me, this image right here. I know what happened, but it was really hard to figure out back in the pictures. So what happens is Pabst the Troll goes and throws a block into the Dwarf Lineman right there. He manages to knock him down, injure him, and get a casualty result. However, I think my opponent accidentally pulled the wrong model. So one of the models closer to the bottom of the screen disappears in the course of this, and the guy that he actually knocked down goes and stays there. This was clearly just an error on my opponent's part. We haven't played in a while, and of course there's the whole rigmarole of me taking pictures during the whole thing, so probably just there's a little back and forth, and then when it came to grab the model, he just happened to grab the wrong one. Honestly, I think him pulling that model is more to my benefit than to his, because I would obviously rather have people in contact with my troll so he can keep punching people, as opposed to having someone loose wandering around with no tackle zones on him. Anyway, the good news is that Pabst scores himself a sweet 2 special player points for causing the first casualty of the game. My thrower Toss Ekis goes and just pushes that Troll Slayer back. And Blitzer St. Molly, number 14, goes for the ball, runs in there, but he fails. So 2 Dwarf Linemen stand up in this penultimate turn of the first half. The Dwarf Runner stands up, and his runner tries to dodge out, get that ball, but he fails and manages to stun himself as he lands on his face. My last turn, I cannot get to the end zone, I'm too far away, so it's just down to put the hurt on these dwarfs in front of me before the next half. Blitzer Newcastle goes and stuns the Dwarf Lineman. Pabst unfortunately goes stupid. The Blitzer St. Molly knocks down a Dwarf Lineman, and the Black Orc Ham's Fist knocks himself down. He doesn't hurt himself, but that will end the first half of the game. So being 1 up on the score and receiving the kickoff, I'm feeling like I'm in a pretty good position. Here is a picture of the Orcs receiving and their lineup. The Dwarfs have lined up, as you can see. The crowd is getting a little rowdy because not enough people have been killed, so they throw a rock and stuns the Dwarf runner behind the line. So the kick is made, and my thrower, number 1 Natty Light, goes and gets the ball and moves to the center of the field. My other thrower, Toss Ekis, moves to support him. Number 9, Sting Tao, KOs the Dwarf Blitzer in front of him, and it's looking even better. Blitzer Nuke Castle, number 16, knocks down the Dwarf Blitzer. Blitzer St. Molly pushes a Dwarf Lineman. Number 2, Smash Adams, knocks down the Dwarf Lineman. The Troll Pabst only manages to push the Dwarf Lineman. Black Orc Saw Miller pushes the Troll Slayer. Black Orc Ham's Fist knocks down the other Troll Slayer. And my lineman Creekstone moves to the center of the board. 1 Dwarf Lineman stands up. The Dwarf Blitzer stands up. The Dwarf Runner moves to the end. Try and help out that end of the line of scrimmage. The Dwarf Blitzer goes and with the help from the runner stuns number 9 Sting Tao. My opponent now has to spend a reroll, and he only manages to double push my Blitzer St. Molly. His other Troll Slayer though knocks down Black Orc Ham's Fist. The Dwarf Lineman gets a double knockdown against Kriegstone, and so Kriegstone falls. A Dwarf Lineman comes in and blitzes Pabst the Troll, managing to knock him down. And finally moves through that field to mark my lineman Kriegstone. That of course doesn't bother him. Number 7 Kriegstone just stands right back up again as Orcs take their next turn. Ham's Fist stands up again. My thrower, Natty Light, moves up with the ball. Toss Ekis moves to help form the cage. Nuke Castle moves in to help. Number 2 Blitzer, Smash Adams, pushes the Troll Slayer away from the ball. Black Orc Saw Miller, number 6, knocks down the Troll Slayer. And finally, my Blitzer St. Molly, number 14, pushes the Dwarf Blitzer. It's back to the Dwarf turn again. The Dwarf Runner moves up to Pabst. Troll Slayer stands back up again. The Dwarf Runner moves up to the sideline to assist the block against number 4. The Dwarf Blitzer pushes my lineman Corona Line away from the ball carrier. He has to spend yet another reroll, but Troll Slayer does manage to knock down Pabst the Troll. The Dwarf Lineman moves up to support against my Blitzer Nuke Castle, and the Dwarf Lineman goes with that support and pushes him back. Dwarf Lineman pushes my lineman Kriegstone, and his runner declares a blitz, goes in against number 14 St. Molly and manages to knock himself down. It's the Orc turn again, and Newcastle, number 16, gets a double knockdown against the Dwarf Linemen, so there is no effect because my Blitzers have the block skill as well. Black Orc Ham's Fist goes and pushes the Dwarf Lineman. And then my thrower, number 1, makes a break for the end zone. He has to spend a reroll in order to make that go for it as he's trying to put some distance between that Dwarf line. And he fails again, not only falling, not only dropping the ball, but breaking his own armor and knocking himself out in the process. With that, it is an Orc turnover, and the Dwarf runner moves up to Black Orc Ham's Fist. The Dwarf lineman stands up on the other side of the line. In the middle of that giant fight there, the Troll Slayer knocks down my Black Orc Sawmiller. The Dwarf runner moves back and picks up the ball. His Dwarf lineman goes to pin number 2 Smash Adams in place. And then his Troll Slayer declares the blitz, moves into my Black Orc Ham's Fist, and knocks him out. He's going to go spend some time in the KO dugout. The Dwarf lineman again pushes my lineman, number 4, Corona Line, and does not follow up. His lineman knocks down number 16, Newcastle. And finally at the far end, his other Dwarf lineman knocks down my final lineman, Kriegstone. It's back to the Orcs. Kriegstone stands back up. Pabst, Sawmiller, and Sting Tao all stand up as well. Newcastle stands up to try and get in the way of the ball. Number 5 thrower Toss Ekis moves to support. Lineman number 4 Corona Line blitzes and pushes the Dwarf lineman in front of him. And finally the Blitzer St. Molly pushes that final Dwarf lineman on the far side. Back to the Dwarfs. Another Dwarf lineman gets both down against Blitzer number 2 Smash Adams for no effect to either of them. But the Troll Slayer comes in and knocks him down. The Dwarf runner with the ball comes and moves up to the dead center of the field. The Dwarf lineman squaring off against my thrower Toss Ekis number 5 goes and knocks him out. The Dwarf Blitzer knocks down my Blitzer Newcastle. Dwarf lineman moves back slightly. The other Dwarf lineman knocks down and stuns my Black Orc Sawmiller number 6. My opponent spends one of his rerolls to get his Dwarf lineman to blitz and knock down my lineman Kriegstone. But he knocks him down with a both knockdown result, so it does not get him where he needed to go. So instead he tries to move away, but he fails his dodge, falls down, and it's a Dwarf turnover. So it is the Orc turn. Kriegstone just stands back up again and moves in to help. Blitzer Newcastle is one of the few Orcs between the Dwarfs and the end zone. He stands back up, as does Blitzer Smash Adams. Pabst, crucially, fails stupidity and stands there drooling. Number 9 Blitzer Sting Tao stuns the Troll Slayer in front of him and moves downfield. I have to spend a reroll to do this, but lineman Corona Line manages to push the Dwarf. He does not follow. And unfortunately, the Blitzer St. Molly, number 14, knocks himself down, throwing a block against the Dwarf Blitzer. So back to the Dwarfs. The Dwarf lineman moves up to my Blitzer number 9, Sting Tao. The Dwarf runner with the ball moves over to Sting Tao as well. The Dwarfs have a plan, but again, they're taking another risk putting the ball carrier in the tackle zone of one of my guys. Dwarf lineman blitzes, managing to push Sting Tao out of the way and keep that ball carrier safe. The Dwarf lineman pushes number 2, Smash Adams. The Troll Slayer moves up to help. Dwarf Blitzer moves more towards where the action is, and the Dwarf runner finishes the cage around that ball carrier. Finally, the Dwarf Blitzer knocks down my lineman Corona Line. And it's Orc turn again. Corona Line stands right back up. Black Orc Sawmiller moves into the fight. Blitzer St. Pauli moves to set up better blocks. Number 7, Kriegstone, my lineman, knocks down the Dwarf lineman in front of him. Pabst is now clear to move into the Dwarf cage. Blitzer, number 2, Smash Adams, blitzes, knocks down the Dwarf lineman, and also moves in to put a tackle zone on the Dwarf runner with the ball. Number 16, Newcastle, pushes the Troll Slayer but doesn't follow up. And finally, number 9, Sting Tao, knocks down the Dwarf lineman in front of him. The Dwarfs look like they have a serious challenge getting that ball clear. But it is Dwarf turn. The Dwarf lineman moves up to this giant combat happening in the middle of the field. The Troll Slayer moves up to Sawmiller, number 6. The Dwarf Blitzer moves around to the back. Dwarf lineman stands up. Dwarf runner manages to push number 2, Smash Adams. Dwarf lineman stands up. My opponent spends a reroll, and that will be his last of this half. And the Troll Slayer blitzes, knocking down my lineman Corona Line. His Dwarf Blitzer knocks down Nuke Castle, and it's looking a lot more dangerous in that side of the field. Crucially, his Dwarf Lineman knocks down, breaks the armor, and stuns number 9 Sting Tau. Pabst is now the only one with the tackle zone on the ball carrier. Orcs are falling left and right in front of the Dwarf advance. And the Dwarf runner dodges away from Pabst, and he makes 2 go-for-its to end up within a hair's breadth of the end zone. My turn, and I spend my last reroll to stand up Nuke Castle, dodging away and making 2 go-for-its to put a desperate tackle zone on the ball carrier. I do not have enough movement to throw a blitz. Number 6, Black Orc Saw Miller blitzes the Troll Slayer, pushes him, doesn't follow up, and moves up to Pabst. I need to have that troll help out. Pabst only manages to push the Dwarf Lineman in front of him. Number 9 Blitzer Sting Tau gets up, dodges away, and with 2 go-for-its puts another tackle zone onto the Dwarf ball carrier. It doesn't help his odds of breaking away, but if that guy does fall, I am going to surround that ball with Orc Blitzers. Lineman Krieg Stone pushes the Dwarf Lineman in front of him. And not seen in any picture, my Blitzer number 14 St. Molly also makes 2 go-for-its to put a 3rd tackle zone on the Dwarf ball carrier. It all comes down to this. The Dwarf ball carrier, the runner, only needs to make a 3+ dodge in order to make that touchdown. If he fails, the ball will pop loose and almost certainly get into Orc possession. Will he make it? Yes, he does. The 3+ no reroll dodge comes up, the Dwarf sprints into the end zone, and it is a tie game. With only 1 turn remaining for each side, there is no chance of scoring any additional touchdowns. The Orcs line up their only goal to inflict as much harm as possible on the Dwarfs. The Dwarfs, of course, put up as few models on that line as they possibly can. The ball lands here and no one seems to care. Cheering fans give everyone an extra reroll so that more carnage will be had. Number 16, Blitzer Nuke Castle knocks down the Dwarf Lineman fed to him. Number 2, Smash Adams knocks down a Dwarf Lineman over there. We are not breaking armor. My thrower, Natty Light, throws a block and pushes the Dwarf Lineman. Black Orc Saw Miller also pushes the Dwarf Lineman. No one's falling, no one's dying. My lineman, Coors Cutter, knocks down a Dwarf Lineman, as does lineman Krieg Stone. Corona Line moves up so that Blitzer, number 14, St. Molly, can blitz, stunning a Dwarf Lineman. And then he moves back to the line out of retribution range of the Dwarfs. Number 9, Blitzer Sting Tau moves to take a look at the ball just because he feels someone ought to. It is the final turn, and the only thing to happen is that the Troll Slayer blitzes number 13, Pabst the Troll, and manages to knock himself down. With that is the end of the game with a 1-1 tie. When all the money and casualties have been counted, the Dwarfs recover fully from their game. Their only casualty managed to shake off the injury for no ill effects. The Orcs suffered no casualties in return. The Dwarfs get $60,000 and +1 fan factor for the game. The Orcs earn $60,000 in cash, and their fans are extremely disappointed that no one died in the course of the game. Their fan factor goes down by 1. However, for the MVP, it goes to my number 16, the guy who scored the touchdown, Blitzer Nuke Castle. He goes up and gets a new skill. I decide to give him Mighty Blow, so he will have a little extra power in this next game coming up. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully this league will continue, and I will bring you more action as it occurs.